It's great to see people here and also over Zoom who I know from birding in the area. And I think you guys have also already heard from some people in my research group in this talk series because Freda Guo, who talked about bird migration here, as well as Kojo Baidu, who studied black vultures, were both in my lab at Princeton. So I study a lot of different bird species in my lab and a lot of different topics. But what I'm going to talk about today is the project that's probably nearest and dearest to my heart, which is about breeding behavior in greater anis. So most bird watchers in the US have at least seen anis in field guides because there are two species of anis that make it into the United States. We have groove-billed and smooth-billed anis that the northern edge of their range is in the US. The greater ani is in the same genus as those ani species, but it's more southerly in distribution. It's an Amazonian species, and I study it in Panama, which is the northern edge of its range. But all of the anis share a really unusual communal breeding system where a bunch of different adults who are not relatives of each other get together in unrelated groups and nest together, and they raise their young communally. Sometimes when I tell people this, they say it's like a commune or a kibbutz, and it kind of is. It's basically like communal child rearing, except with the important difference that the anis don't recognize their own young, so they don't know whose kids are whose. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about my work on anis in Panama, but also try to put it in a bit of a broader context and talk to you about mating system in birds more generally, mating and parental care systems, the diversity of mating and parental care systems we see in birds, how anis fit into that, and how the cuckoos, which are the family that anis belong to, sort of exemplify the diversity of mating and mating systems and parental care strategies that we see across birds. Oh, this is not working. Okay, we knew that something had to go wrong. That's okay. How can we advance it though? It doesn't advance. Let's see. We take this out. Nope. We did test this before and it worked, but it's not working anymore. Oh, yep, now it's working. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so like I said, the anis are a small group of cuckoos. They're in the subfamily of cuckoos, the crotophagine cuckoos. They're in the genus Crotophaga, which means tick eater. And all of the anis are really social. If you've ever seen anis in the tropics, like in Costa Rica, a lot of people's first encounters with anis are like groove-billed anis in Costa Rica. These are smooth-billed anis. They're always social birds. They live in groups, they breed in groups, they don't like being alone. The smooth-billed anis in this photograph are huddled together on a perch. But what's unusual about these birds is that these social groups raise young together and they're not related. The individuals in the groups are not related to each other, which is quite unusual in birds. This is a photograph of greater anis from Panama. Greater anis are similar to groove and smooth-billed anis. They breed in groups. Their groups are rather small, usually 2 or 3 breeding pairs. And males and females look identical, so you can't tell them apart, but this is actually a photograph of 2 breeding pairs that will raise young together, sometimes for several years. They have very stable groups. These are not fly-by-night associations. The members of these groups are basically social mates with each other. You know, the males know each other, the females know each other, they feed each other's young, they live together. These birds can live up to 20 years. So they're really almost like primate social groups. Why are they communal rather than just social? Well, communal birds build a single nest, and all of the females in the group lay their eggs in the same nest. And this is unusual across animals, but particularly within birds, because when you put a lot of eggs in a nest, it gets harder to raise the young, right? It's harder to incubate a lot of eggs. If you find an ani nest, this is a greater ani nest from my study site in Panama, but I found groove-billed ani nests in the Rio Grande in Texas that look identical to this. The eggs are blue. The shell is blue, but they have this white chalky coating on the outside that you can kind of see in that picture. The white chalky coating is called vaterite. And there's no like spots or patterns on these eggs. So females can't recognize their own eggs. Obviously, males have no idea which females have laid which eggs. And so the females have to coordinate their reproduction. They have to synchronize their egg laying. They have to lay at the same time. They incubate the eggs as a communal clutch. All of the eggs have to be incubated together. You guys know how important timing is for reproduction and for incubation. So they all have to be laying at the same time. The eggs have to be incubated at the same time. And once the chicks hatch, all of the adults in the nest help to rear the chicks together. They all feed the young, and they can't recognize their own nestlings either. So they all feed whatever mouth pops up out of that communal nest. This is a picture of 10 eggs that were laid by 3 unrelated females in a breeding group. And the females in this breeding group actually stayed together for about 7 years with like no change, no turnover. This is a picture from a motion activated nest camera that we used again at my field site in Panama. And what it's showing is one pair at the nest. There's a female sitting on the nest, and she's just taken a green leaf that her mate, the male, has brought in. And when you watch one of these nests, it's so cool because you see the 2 or 3 pairs coming in and doing different things at the nest. Sometimes they interact with each other, and sometimes one pair will build for a while and then they'll leave and the other pair will come in. And then eventually you'll see all of them together. They do these communal vocalizations where they all huddle together in chorus. If you've ever been birding in like Ecuador, you might have seen these big choruses of greater anis. They make really cool noises. This is a photograph of a nest after the chicks have hatched, and you can see all 4 of the adults in the group bringing food into the mixed clutch of chicks at the same time. Greater anis are large insect specialists, so they mostly eat grasshoppers, katydids, roaches, cicadas, and occasionally small vertebrates. The adults will also eat fruit and flowers in the non-breeding season, but they feed their young almost all big insects.
So not ticks.
Not ticks, actually, yes, even though they're in the genus Protophaga. Yeah, not ticks. I don't think any of them really eat ticks, but they like the smooth-billed anis follow cattle, and so gossip led to that name. So Ani groups are, oh, I see a question in the chat. Is there monogamy between pairs? Yeah, great question. So the pairs are socially monogamous. That is to say there's a pair bond and the pairs stick together within the group. So you can behaviorally identify which birds are mated to which in the groups. Genetically, there's about 10 to 15% of the nestlings are actually produced by matings outside of that pair bond, which is not at all unusual for birds. Birds are famously socially monogamous and genetically promiscuous. So anis are no exception. Most of the groups in my study area have just 2 pairs. About 20% of the groups also have a third pair. And we call them like the third pair because usually the way these groups form is that there's an existing 2-pair group and then a third pair joins them. And so most of these groups, the core group is kind of 2 pairs, sometimes with a third pair. But they also have single birds that we call helpers. Helpers are birds that are not paired and they don't reproduce. And sometimes helpers are related to one of the breeding pairs. They're actually previous offspring that were produced by the group in the prior year or 2 years before. The helpers are usually young birds. The related helpers are typically sons. But there are also unrelated helpers, again, unpaired birds that don't reproduce, but they help to raise the young. They help defend against predators. They even incubate. They do pretty much all the parental care that the breeding adults do, but they don't actually reproduce themselves. The unrelated helpers are mostly females. And what we have seen is that the related helpers that are sons tend to disperse after they're 2 or 3 years old and they go on to breed elsewhere. Whereas the unrelated helpers that are often female will typically try to stay with the group and try to breed with the group in a subsequent year. So helping might be like their way of gaining group membership. But anis also have another way to be an ani, and that is sometimes they act as brood parasites, which is that sometimes a female who's not a group member will sneak over to a group's nest and lay her eggs in the nest and then leave without providing parental care. These two sometimes try to join the group as well. So sometimes these are females who want to be part of the group and they lay an egg in the nest and then the group members chase them off. This is a form of brood parasitism called conspecific brood parasitism, meaning that it's a bird of the same species that's laying in a nest of another female of the same species. But you can imagine how complicated these groups get when you can have 8 or even more individuals that are all trying to reproduce in the same nest in the same group. The one way you cannot be an Ani, at least not a breeding Ani, is you can't be a lone pair or a lone bird. So they're almost not entirely unique, but almost unique in birds in that they never nest as lone pairs. They always nest in groups. After studying them for almost 20 years, I have never found a single nest that was only attended by one pair. They won't even build a nest or try to reproduce if they're not in a group. So I'm often asked by birders and by other scientists, like, how unusual is this? Like, it seems like this is such a bizarre way of breeding. And it is unusual, especially if you're used to breeding systems in the temperate zone. So if we go outside and go birding, the vast majority of the birds that you and I see in the DVOC area are birds that are socially monogamous, that is, a male and a female form a pair bond, and they have biparental care. Both the male and the female help raise their offspring. And it's really common in the temperate zone. And so this is kind of like the default that we think of for birds. Something like between 80 and 90% of all bird species worldwide have this sort of standard breeding system and parental care system. But we do have some exceptions. You guys all have seen hummingbirds, and all of the hummingbirds, including our ruby-throated hummingbirds, are not monogamous and have female-only parental care. So males and females mate, but then females build the nest and raise the young alone. And it's worth noting that hummingbirds are really, of course, a tropical lineage of birds, and we just see the most northern members of that lineage here. Because in the tropics, mating systems and parental care systems and breeding behavior in general are a lot more diverse than what we see in the temperate zone. That's one of the reasons why so much of my work is based in the tropics, is that we see, just like we see a diversity of species in the tropics, we also see a diversity of behaviors and parental care systems. Another unusual parental care system that you have probably heard about in our area are the phalaropes, which the hummingbirds have female-only parental care. Phalaropes have male parental care, where a female has many mates and the males provide care to the young. And I know I don't need to tell, like, most of the people in this audience that, you know, this led to early artists like Audubon and Wilson mislabeling their plates because the female is the brighter and more colorful sex. And this is an Audubon painting of Wilson's phalaropes where the brighter and more colorful individual is labeled as a male. And the duller the duller one is a female. That's actually mislabeled. And so phalaropes and some of the birds that we see during migration here, like spotted sandpipers, have this system of male parental care and females mating with multiple males. And finally, not in our birding region, but if you go to other parts of the country, there are a very few species in the United States that are cooperative breeders. Some of you might have seen Florida scrub jays, which are endemic to just a small strip of scrub oak habitat in Central Florida. So Florida scrub jays do something a little bit similar to the Anis. They're not communal nesters, but they're cooperative breeders in that young birds remain with their parents instead of dispersing right away, and the young birds help their parents raise younger siblings the next year. That's kind of the most common form of cooperative breeding in birds, is basically cooperation by family members, cooperation by offspring that don't disperse but instead stay with their parents to raise young. And again, this is much more common. This form of cooperative breeding is much more common in the tropics than it is in the temperate zone. Probably something like 10% of bird species in the tropics breed cooperatively like this, but it's very understudied. In fact, in general, mating and parental care systems in tropical birds are poorly documented compared to the ones in the temperate zone. And finally, another one you might be familiar with, again, this will sound familiar from the Anis, is brood parasites. So the common brood parasite we have here is, of course, the brown-headed cowbird, which parasitizes other species of songbirds. So brown-headed cowbirds are heterospecific brood parasites, meaning they lay their eggs in the nests of other species. Another parental care system that's more common in the tropics than here. So where do the Anis land in all of this? So I've kind of given you this rundown of the diversity of mating and parental care strategies in birds. Anis, like I said, are cuckoos. And cuckoos are really interesting because many of the cuckoos, like our yellow-billed and black-billed cuckoos, are our sort of typical boring temperate zone birds. They're socially monogamous and they have biparental care. But the cuckoos that we have here are actually facultative brood parasites as well. They occasionally put their eggs in the nests of other cuckoos and even of other species. So they have been documented to opportunistically parasitize other species, which may not be a coincidence, because if you sort of zoom out from our region and look back at the cuckoo family tree, this is just sort of a simplified diagram of the relationships between the 5 major lineages of cuckoos. We have the top one is the subfamily Cuculinae. Those are the cuckoos we're most familiar with. Those are the New World cuckoos that we see here, as well as many of the Old World cuckoos. Those two in the middle, the Cuas, are a lineage in Madagascar. The Cuccals are African. And then on the bottom, we have the ground cuckoos and roadrunners and the Anis. So, and we think this is the sort of relationship more or less between these 5 lineages of cuckoos. But it's an incredibly diverse family. There are about 130 species in these 5 lineages. And what's cool about them from the perspective of an evolutionary biologist is that all of those different strategies that I described to you, female-only parental care, male-only parental care, obligate brood parasitism, facultative brood parasitism, and communal nesting all occur within the cuckoo family. They like run the tables on how to raise young as a bird. So the cuckoos are interesting because, like I said, it's probably not a coincidence that the Anis are brood parasites as well as communal nesters and are embedded in this lineage that has such a diversity of mating and parental care strategies. There seems to be something ancestral about cuckoos that lends them to exploring these different ways of raising young. So the cuccals there are some species that are monogamous with biparental care, but there's also species with reverse sexual dimorphism and male-only parental care, like the phalaropes. In the Old World cuckoos, as well as in the bottom lineage, there are obligate brood parasites, like the common cuckoo of Europe, famously an obligate brood parasite. There are facultative brood parasites. There are species with female-only parental care. So it's really an interesting family to work with. If you've heard of cool breeding systems in cuckoos, you've probably heard mostly about the parasitic Old World cuckoos, which are like our brown-headed cowbird. They're obligate brood parasites. They lay their eggs in the nests of other species, but they're really good at it. They're really sneaky brood parasites. Different female common cuckoos lay their eggs in the nests of different host species, and their eggs mimic the eggs of the host species that they lay their eggs into. So this is a reed warbler nest at the bottom there. Can you guys pick out the parasitic egg? There's a cuckoo egg in there. The big one, yeah, exactly. They got the pattern right, but they couldn't quite match the size. And so the nestling common cuckoos and some of the other species of obligate brood parasitic cuckoos as well, the nestling cuckoo, the parasite evicts or kills the host eggs or nestlings. That's a pretty common strategy in the brood parasites. And then they take all the resources for themselves, and you get this this ridiculous scenario. So the reason that I've kind of gone through all of this, both the diversity of mating strategies and parental care strategies in birds, as well as the diversity within the cuckoos, is that for an evolutionary biologist, the challenge is not just to document this diversity, but it's also to try to explain it and try to understand why certain lineages develop one system, whereas others don't. Why across the range of a single species, you might see some individuals that breed cooperatively and some that don't, or some individuals who are parasitic and some that aren't. And so what we try to do as biologists is to collect data from the field to look both within species as well as comparatively across species to try to come up with correlates that might help us explain why a particular species has evolved a particular breeding system, which brings us back to the Anis. Like I said before, Anis form these socially monogamous and mostly genetically monogamous pairs that breed in groups with these communal nests. And I've been studying them for about 20 years now in central Panama. That map up there shows the Isthmus of Panama with central Panama in that red box. And Barra, Colorado Island is a field station operated by the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute that's basically in the middle of the Panama Canal. It was formed when the Chagres River was dammed to create the Panama Canal. It used to be a hilltop, and now it's an island that's a research preserve. In this photograph, this is an aerial photograph, you can see the ships in the Panama Canal, kind of that white dot on the north side of the island. So the Panama Canal runs right around the island. And each of those red dots is the location of a communal greater Ani nest. And so you can see they're all on the shoreline. Greater Anis, unlike the groove and smooth-billed Anis, greater Anis like to nest in marshy or emergent vegetation. They like to nest as far away from land predators as they can get. So they typically, the nests are only accessible by boat. We do all of our field work by boat. And this is what the habitat looks like. It's lowland tropical forest, and the Anis nest on the shoreline of Lake Gatun. If you go to other parts of the Anis range in the Amazon, they also nest near the water, often in like riverine ecosystems or along tributaries of the Amazon. This is an Ani nest. I don't know, do I have a, no, sorry. I don't know if you will be able to see this. I will try to point it out. That is an Ani nest there. Sorry for those of you over Zoom. Thank you. They nest low over the water, and so you can paddle up to their nests in a boat and take out the eggs and chicks and take blood samples from the nestlings and do all kinds of cool things to them. So they like to nest in tree branches overhanging the water, or they like to nest in emergent vegetation, small trees that are growing in the water. It makes fieldwork challenging in some ways because we have to do everything from boats. So including like misnetting birds, trapping them, banding the chicks, everything has to be done from a boat. But in another sense, it's actually great because we can get around this huge study area and find lots of nests because it's basically like a linear search along the shoreline. This is my longtime project manager, Megan Strong, who's holding an Ani egg. There's a chat that said they're big eggs. It's true. The birds themselves are about the size of maybe like a boat-tailed grackle, but the eggs are, as you can see from what Megan's holding, the eggs are like 30 grams. They're about 18% of female body mass, which is on the upper end for a bird that can fly. It doesn't get too much bigger than that. And you can even see females look like you can visibly see an egg in the female's belly as she flies if she's about to lay an egg, which is, again, kind of unusual for birds. So what we do is within the study area, we find the nests every year, which is pretty easy because the groups are stable over time. They nest in the same place every year with the same birds. We mark the eggs when they're laid so we can keep track of them. We take blood samples from the outside of the egg. This is a smear of blood left by a female when she laid the egg, so we can genotype the mother that laid each egg. We take blood samples from the adults and from the nestlings, and that's how we can do things like know parentage and study their mating system and things like that. That's also how we know that they're not related to each other. And this is a nest camera photograph from a banded nestling. These guys are about to fledge. Like all cuckoos, they grow very, very fast. They have a really short nestling period. They're out of the nest really quickly. So we actually can't ban them or do anything with them at this age. These guys are like about ready to fledge. They're about 3 weeks old. We can't even visit the nest after the nestlings are 6 days old because they will jump out of the nest and swim. Ani chicks are really good at escaping. So why do Anis breed in groups, right? Like, why do they have this crazy breeding behavior? They are cooperative in many respects, but there are also some real costs to breeding in groups. Like almost every social group involves across all animals, and this is not just Anis I'm talking about, social groups typically always involve a mix of cooperative things that help group members and conflict and competition, right? And Anis are no exception. So one of the weird things about the Anis, and all Anis do this, not just the greater Ani, is that at the beginning of the laying period, when birds are nesting together in a social group, the first egg that's laid in the communal nest by any of the females will be ejected from the nest. It will be removed from the nest by other females in the same social group. So I'm going to try to play you this video. Hopefully it will not screw everything up, and hopefully it'll play over Zoom. And what it's going to show you is an Ani nest is seen from above, and you can see there's one egg in the nest. A female has laid an egg in the nest. It's a group member. And a different female is at the nest, and she will toss that egg out of the nest. She will remove that egg from the nest. We have no sound, but fortunately you can see it. Now the egg has been pushed onto the rim of the nest. Now the female comes back and gets rid of it. Yeah. So this is actually the way that Anis synchronize their reproduction. So I mentioned before, all the females have to be laying at the same time so that they can have the clutch ready to go and be incubated together. That's really important, right? You can't have a situation where one female lays a bunch of eggs and then the other females decide they're ready to lay. By the time the first female is incubating, the other females would still be adding eggs, and then the chicks would all hatch at different times. So what happens is that in a group, like a group with two females, if you have a female A and a female B in this group, if female A lays the first egg, female B will always eject that egg because she hasn't laid yet. But once female B starts laying, then A and B have both laid an egg and they don't eject eggs anymore. Then eggs can accumulate in the nest. Sometimes female A might lay 2 or 3 or even more eggs before female B starts laying. So they actually have to be reproductively synchronized. That second female has to be ready to lay when the first female is ready to lay. And they do this coordination through a lot of behaviors prior to egg laying. They don't just like start laying one day. They have a lot of probably involving those group displays and vocalizations and things like that. It gets even worse sometimes if they're not on the same page. So if they're not synchronized well, female A might lay several eggs before B is on the same page. And sometimes, occasionally, there just simply isn't synchrony and they abandon the nesting attempt rather than continuing. But it's not too common, but it does happen. And you can imagine this problem is even worse if you have 3 females, because then A, B, and C all have to start laying. Yeah.
A at some point become not able to generate the eggs, or I mean,
they do, and that's when they abandon the nesting attempt. But it takes a lot of eggs. They will try for a long time. They're indeterminate layers, meaning that they don't have a fixed clutch size. Females will lay as many eggs as they can, and if predators find the nest, for example, this happens a lot, right? If a snake finds the nest, a snake might eat eggs as soon as they're laid for several days before the females finally abandon it. So a given female can lay, like we've had females lay 12 or 13 eggs in a single like nesting attempt, which is amazing given that they're so big.
Be able to produce that number.
Exactly right. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, actually, about the relationship between prey abundance and breeding in the Anis. One thing that's interesting to note is that a lot of tropical birds have many reproductive attempts in a given season. So something like a spotted antbird will only lay 2 eggs in a clutch, but they'll lay 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 clutches over the course of a long breeding season. The Anis do the opposite. They lay big clutches, but they only have usually 1 breeding attempt a year, if that. So earlier in my PhD work, I was trying to sort of untangle the costs and benefits of living in groups and looking at how the costs of things like egg ejection vary with group size, as well as any potential benefits that they get from being in groups. Since Anis don't nest as lone pairs, I couldn't look at lone pairs as a comparison, but I could look at the reproductive output, or how many chicks and fledglings each female produces in groups of different sizes. And so with the Anis, the number of eggs that are ejected at the beginning increases with group size, which makes sense because as more females join the group, more eggs are ejected at the beginning during that initial period where they're synchronizing laying. And groups with 4 and 5 laying females are very rare, and those are usually abandoned, or one female gets tired and leaves the group and the others continue to nest as a smaller group. This is just showing basically the cost in terms of how many eggs are ejected from the communal nest as a function of group size. And you'll see we have no information on what would happen with lone pairs, but we would assume that there wouldn't be any eggs ejected if they did nest as lone pairs. And so one of the things I was interested in understanding was like, who is female A, right? Like, why does someone kind of like pay the cost of being the first to lay when that first laid egg is always destroyed? And the answer is that it's really not consistent. I thought perhaps it was the youngest female or the female in the best body condition or the female in the worst body condition, but it's really not consistent. There's almost nothing that predicts the identity of like who lays first in these groups. And if you look at the same group over time, females change their sort of position in the laying order. So female A this year might be female B next year. Female B this year might be female C or A next year. So most of the time they change positions. And if you look at these costs over time, in a female's lifetime, they all wind up losing eggs at some point to ejection, but there are no consistent differences across individuals. But so why are they nesting in groups? Well, the main benefit seems to be that nesting in groups reduces nest predation. More birds mean more eyes and more beaks to defend against nest predators. And we know this from comparing groups of different sizes, as well as looking at groups that have helpers, because predator defense is one of the things the helpers are really effective with. So I mentioned before that anis like to nest as much over the water as they can, and they like to nest in emergent vegetation as much as possible. And that's because most of the nest predators are snakes. Snakes are huge predators of nests and tropical birds. They're responsible for at least 90% of the egg and nestling mortality in anis. And snakes are less likely to get to those isolated nests, but they're also the predators that the birds in the group can defend their nestlings and eggs against. And so if you look at the risk of nest predation, this is just, if you categorize a nest as either it failed because predators ate all the eggs or nestlings, or it succeeded because at least some of the nestlings fledged. If you just look at the proportion of nests that fail due to nest predators as a function of group size, you can see there's like a pretty steep decline with group size. Every additional group member, so 4 would be 2 pairs, 5 would be 2 pairs plus a helper, 6 is 3 pairs, 7 is 3 pairs plus a helper, and so forth. And each additional group member you add decreases the likelihood that that nest will be depredated by 11 to 15%. So it's a pretty striking difference. But what's interesting though, is that you'll notice what I've put here above this graph is the sample sizes above each bar. And somewhat counterintuitively, you can see that actually the most common group size, N of 217, is the smallest group size. So 2-pair groups with no helpers are actually the most common group size in the population, even though these have the highest rates of nest predation. So that's kind of interesting. It shows that there must be some costs to communal nesting as well as benefits. If there were just benefits, everyone would nest in big groups. So if you look at that consequence of group size to not just the proportion of successful nests, and here I'm just comparing simply 2-pair groups versus 3-pair groups without including helpers. If you look at the proportion of successful nests, which are the black bars, as well as the individual reproductive output. So how many fledglings does a female in a group of 2 versus a female in a group of 3 produce? Those are the white bars. They're both higher in large groups. Or at least that's what I thought during my PhD work. But again, this sort of raises the paradox of like, why are the large groups less common if they're more successful? So it turns out that the answer actually comes down to, I think, Art's point, right, about food. So the key here is that not all years are equal. And some years, it's very hard to raise young in these big groups. And that's because rainfall varies a lot in the tropics. In Panama, where I've worked, we've had several major El Nino events over the past 20 years. El Ninos in the temperate zone, we experience them as unusually warm winters. But Central America experiences El Nino as drought years. And this really affects even tropical forest birds, like birds that we're not used to thinking of as being particularly affected by drought. Rainfall patterns in the tropics affect food for tropical birds, and we're just starting to realize this. And in dry years, there's not enough food to go around for the anis. And in fact, in dry years, most groups don't breed at all. So when I started my PhD work, most of my data were collected in 2006 and 2007, which were rainy years, and there were tons of anis and everyone was breeding. 2009 was a drier year and there was very little nesting activity. And at the time, my only thought was, well, it's a 3-year PhD and I got 2 good years, so that's good, we're good. But over a longer time series, what I can see is that actually that's a really repeatable pattern. Years that are La Nina years or neutral years that have normal or high rainfall, all the anis breed. Years that are drier, most of the groups simply skip breeding altogether. And it probably comes down to the costs of producing all those large eggs and the cost of feeding the nestlings. For the birds that do breed, it's harder to raise those large clutches of nestling, and the nestlings actually starve. This is particularly the case in those larger groups that have 3 breeding pairs. And you'd think, well, they're larger groups, they have more nestlings, but they also have more like adults to feed all the nestlings. So like, why is it worse to be in a large clutch? Well, the reason is that the nestlings compete with each other. And so if you have like a runty nestling and a nest of 12 nestlings, it's definitely going to starve. Whereas if you have a runty nestling and a nest of 6 nestlings, it will probably be just fine because it won't be outcompeted. So the very large clutches, these clutches produced by larger groups, suffer disproportionately in dry years. So in dry years, there's a much higher cost to being in a large group. And this is a longer time series, not just the first couple of years. This is showing the sort of breeding success of the total number of offspring produced by a given individual in the study population of 3 pair groups shown in red and of 2 pair groups shown in blue. And it's just as a function of time, that's just years on the x-axis there. And what's cool to notice is that in some years, birds in small groups and 2 pair groups do better, they produce more young. And in other years, birds in 3 pair groups do better. And in really dry years, like the 2009 and 2015 El Niños, the larger groups do quite poorly. And so this is probably why we see both 2 and 3 pair groups in the study population, why there's a diversity of group sizes, as well as why we see variation in success in those group sizes across years with resources.
What's the average between those 2 groups?
The average reproductive output, or
over all those years, is there an average?
Well, let's see. The average, I'm trying to think of, so in an average year, probably 60% of the birds breed at all, right? So of the birds that actually breed, the average reproductive output is probably about 1 nestling, but that's kind of misleading because if a nest is successful, the adults will produce 3 or 4 chicks for a given adult. And if the nest is unsuccessful, they produce 0. So there are very few nests where they actually produce the average number of offspring, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but so what I was kind of wondering is the average for a 2 pair differing drastically from an average for a 3 pair?
Oh, right. Great question.
Does it even out?
Overall,
it
does. It evens out over time. I don't have that figure here. I probably have it. I can probably dig it up for you. But yeah, over time,
Can you repeat the question, please? It's hard to hear from the audience. Thanks.
Sure. The question is, over time, does the reproductive output of individuals in 2 and 3 pair groups become equal? Or like if you sort of put all of these different years together across wet and dry years. And we've done exactly that because we have lifetime data on these females. We track them over time and it does even out. It's higher on average in 3 pair groups than in 2 pair groups, but it's not a significant difference. And the reason for that is because there's so much variation. Yeah. So yeah, it does pretty much wash out. So another thing I worked on in the study population, in addition to sort of differences in group size and costs and benefits of group nesting, is also individual females' reproductive strategies. Like, why are some females in 2 pair groups versus 3 pair groups? Why do some anis act as conspecific brood parasites and others don't? And this was another thing that the sort of seeds for this question were planted very early in my PhD when I was genotyping eggs and realized that sometimes I was finding eggs that weren't produced by any of the females in the group. And we started to see some behavioral evidence of this as well. I mentioned before the unrelated female helpers that are at nests. Sometimes they try to lay eggs. And so they become not helpers, but parasites. The sort of difference between these behavioral roles can be very gray areas. So I knew that anis acted as brood parasites, but it's not a very successful strategy. These are not good brood parasites, unlike the common cuckoos. One of the, oops, I don't have a figure showing so on average, the parasitic eggs have very low success compared to the eggs laid by the breeding group. And one of the reasons for that is that they are not as tightly synchronized with the reproductive females in the breeding group. So parasites often lay their eggs too early or too late compared to when the host females are laying their eggs. And anis can actually recognize when eggs were laid based on the appearance of the egg. So I mentioned before that the eggs are blue. The shell is blue. And if you scrape that white chalky coating off an ani egg, you see the blue shell underneath. But when they're freshly laid, they have this intact white chalky coating. And so my field assistants and I can easily tell like what stage a nest is in by looking at the nest. We can tell, oh, this egg was laid today versus this egg was laid 3 or 4 days ago versus this nest has been in incubation for a long time. And it turns out the anis can do this as well. The anis can recognize which eggs were laid more recently and which eggs were longer ago by looking at the appearance of the egg and how blue it is. This is showing a series of eggs over the course of incubation. Not all of them get to be as blue as that one on the right, but the white shell abrades, and you can certainly see the difference in the color and in the texture of the shell as it moves through incubation. So parasitic eggs are often laid later than host eggs. Sometimes they're laid earlier, in which case they're really easy to eject because none of the females have started laying, and then everyone will just kick that egg out regardless of who laid it. But late eggs are also ejected too because they look fresh and white in a nest of incubated blue eggs. And that's one of the reasons that the hatching success of these parasitic eggs is very low. Another reason is that if they're laid late, even if they stay in the nest, they typically hatch late as well. And so the chicks are smaller and runtier than the eggs that were laid at the same time. So the parasites are only successful if they manage to lay their eggs in the nest at exactly the right time when the group females are laying.
Did you say that one of the reasons that parasitic layers do so is because they're trying to join the group? I mean, it seems like, as you're saying, it's not a successful breeding strategy.
I'm so glad you asked that question. This is not a plant. But yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, so the question was basically, why are the females doing this? Are they trying to join the group as parasites? And the answer is that yes, sometimes. So because we have long-term information on these females over years, we know from the genotypes about the females that laid these parasitic eggs. So we can look back and see, oh, this parasitic egg was laid by female 07-021 who was in this group last year. And oh, look, she was nesting just 200 meters away. So we went back and looked at the histories of the eggs that were laid by females. And this is really hard to do in birds because brood parasites are hard to study because you don't see the parasites, right? The egg turns up, but you have to have genetic information on the mom and you have to have like life history information on that female, maybe banded birds in a study population or something before you can trace them back and see what about this female's past led her to become a parasite. But we could do this in the anis, and we were able to do it for 65 parasitic eggs. We were able to identify who laid the egg. And most of the time they're laid by females who had a group nest nearby, but that nest was depredated while they were still laying. So if a group's nest is found by a predator and the eggs start disappearing while that group is laying, they can simply stop laying. Most of them do that, but a minority of them instead will switch to laying their eggs in a different nest. And I think in most cases, they are trying to join the group. I don't think they're actually trying to escape the costs of providing parental care. I think they're looking for a new group to join. But in most cases, the host group doesn't want them because there are, again, costs to having a bigger group. And there are real costs to expanding clutch size in birds. You know, the hatching rates of eggs go down, the fledging rates of eggs, the starvation rates go up, competition goes up, synchrony becomes a problem. All of these problems get more complicated the more females you have laying in a nest. And really, that's why communal breeding is so rare in birds to begin with, is because of these costs. Yeah, Barb.
Is there another, excuse me, is there another scenario where the nest was not destroyed by predators, but that female was in a group plus laid the parasitic egg?
Yeah, the question is, is it always that females have, you know, their nest destroyed, or do they sometimes simply lay opportunistically as parasites? Yes, they do. They do that sometimes, but it's the minority of cases. I think maybe we had 7 instances of that happening where it was a nesting female that laid as a parasite. We've also had a few cases where a parasitic egg turned up in a nest, and we don't know whether that female also had a home nest or a home group that year. Like, it was laid by a female who might have simply been a floater, like not affiliated with a group, or we might have missed the nest and not known, like not been able to find it and not known where that female was, like where her home base was. I'm trying to think if we've had any other cool, it happens very quickly. So we've had some pretty cool instances where we knew that a nest failed at a particular time of day. Like, we know a snake came to the nest because we had a nest camera on it. We know a snake came to the nest at like 4 in the morning. And then at 9 the next morning, a parasitic egg from that group turned up 100 meters away. You know, they tend to go for the closest nests when they're like trying to join a group or trying to lay parasitically. Yeah.
In temperate songbirds, I think egg dumping is not that uncommon, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not by failed nesters, but just females not putting all their eggs in the same basket, as it were.
Yes and no. I mean, it is common in songbirds, reasonably common in songbirds.
Sorry, you gotta repeat the question for people on Zoom, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks for reminding me. The question is, in temperate zone songbirds, egg dumping or conspecific brood parasitism is common, and it's not always by failed nesters. Yeah, that's true. But the real truth is that we don't know most of the time. Like, if you look at the number of studies that have been able to figure out which females laid eggs as conspecific brood parasites, is very low. It's very hard because you have to genotype the egg and you have to know which female laid it, or you have to have nest cameras on enough nests that you can see banded parasitic females laying. So, you know, it's probably that in some species, this could be a tactic used by females opportunistically just to spread the risk across nests, like you said, not put all their eggs in one basket. The best data is in ducks. If you look in conspecific brood parasitism in ducks is really common. And so I think most of the information we have is on ducks, and a lot of it is that what you described. But there's also parasitism by failed nesters too in those species. We're doing on time. I think I'm almost done. Yes, I am pretty much done. So I wanted to just give you sort of a quick overview of a couple of the topics we've discussed that my lab has studied over the years. And I didn't really include a lot of citations to papers in this talk, but if you're interested in any of these findings, you know, the papers are on my website, or you can email me and I'll send them to you. I think what I really hope people get out of this talk is just next time you are in the tropics and you go birding at La Selva or in Costa Rica and you see an Ani, like, just appreciate their really cool breeding behaviors. They're much, much more interesting than their blackbird-like appearance would lead you to believe. These are like the birds that people mostly ignore on tropical birding trips. And I'd like to thank Sean and Barb and you all for having me here tonight, and be happy to talk about this work or to answer any questions.
Question?
Go to the Galapagos, they don't like them.
Right. Yeah, smooth-billed Anis are invasive there. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they actually contacted me a few years ago to ask me how to get rid of the smooth-billed Anis, because there are so few people that study Anis. And I was like, well, if you can find the nests, destroy the nest because they lay lots of eggs. And in a place like the Galapagos where they don't have predators, like can imagine, can imagine how quickly the
They were
population can grow.
quoting, I think they were telling us because of these tick, they were trying to get rid of the ticks for some reason, and they brought in some of these animals and it didn't work out at all.
Didn't work. Yeah, yeah.
They don't eat ticks.
Yeah.
Yeah, mongooses were brought in to control what? And they don't control them. I can't remember. what
Yeah,
they
it was
are.
a similar-
Yeah,
Crazy.
So that in Hawaii too, right? Mongooses in Hawaii?
maybe it's Hawaii. They
I
were
know
brought
about
in
that, yeah.
somewhere to control,
I read that about Hawaii.
and house sparrows were brought into this country to control the flies in the horse dung on the streets. Well, they don't eat the flies.
Yep, don't introduce smooth-billed anis for biocontrol. Bad idea.
So, that's one question I just had. So you study these birds really always along the coast,
Hmm.
and all the data are really based on parasites on the coast.
Mhm.
I was just curious, do some of these, how do we know that some of these animals don't go sometimes inside and parasitize other birds,
Hmm.
other species?
It's possible that they do occasionally parasitize other species. It's very possible. It's really, really rare in birds, but it has been documented in other cuckoo species. So it could be. I wouldn't be surprised. They could parasitize other birds anywhere, right? Along the coast as well, but you would have to find all the nests of other species in order to know. I think it's probably very rare if it happens. I have seen once a pair of limpkins nested next to an ani nest, and the limpkin nest was sort of similar to the ani nest in structure, and the anis ejected all of the limpkin eggs from the nest. And they will occasionally go to other ani nests and eject eggs from other ani nests just to get rid of them, right? Just to say you're nesting too close to our territory. We're raising young here. We don't want you here. So
that's a session of the nest.
no, they just didn't like the
They
limpkins
needed their
nesting so
space.
close to them. They needed their space.
Okay.
So the reason I bring it up is that anis are hyper aware of the location of all the other ani nests nearby. They know those other groups. They know the group members. They know who they are. They know when their nests get depredated. When they need to find a nest to parasitize, they know where to go. When they want to destroy a competitor, they know exactly where to go. We put out fake nests, and we wanted to study nest predation. We put out fake nests with fake eggs, and we were so proud of ourselves because they look just like ani nests. And we were like, we're going to put cameras up and we're going to document all the species of monkeys and snakes that eat these. This is a great undergrad project. We only had one nest predator that found the nest. Most of the nests were destroyed by anis because they were too good. They looked too much like other ani nests. And in some cases, anis came from hundreds of meters away. Banded birds that we knew where they were nesting came from hundreds of meters away to destroy these nests within hours of putting up the nest. So they really know all of the ani nests in the location, and it's possible they know the nests of other birds too. But yeah.
Wow.
A couple questions on Zoom. Patrick asked, how similar is their breeding style to our anis?
To the groove-billed and smooth-billed anis?
I believe.
Yeah, very similar. The groove-billed and smooth-billed anis are also communal nesters. They do the same thing as the anis, the greater anis, except that they are facultative communal nesters, meaning that frequently they nest as lone pairs. The greater anis always nested groups. The groove-billed and smooth-billed anis, it varies across their populations, but in many populations, there are as many or more lone pairs as there are communal groups. The groove-billed anis are more similar to greater anis, it seems, in the sense that their groups are relatively small and well organized. You can identify pairs within the groups. The smooth-billed anis are a little bit less clear. They tend to have larger groups. The social relationships between group members are not as clear. The pair bonds are not as clear always. And I don't believe anything is known in the other two species about how stable the groups are over time, like whether the same birds remain in the groups for multiple breeding attempts. I think there's a little bit of data on that, but not quite as long-term. They also are smaller and they don't live as long.
the nest that you showed with 10 eggs in it,
Mhm.
the eggs are in several layers.
Yeah,
How do you incubate those?
They-
How do you keep them all warm? Or do they do analogous to egg turning? Do they move the top ones down and the bottom ones up?
they turn the eggs a lot. The eggshells are really thick on these eggs, and you can actually, on the cameras we use, on the video cameras, you can actually hear the eggs clunking against each other as the adults turn them. The best answer though is that in those large clutches, hatching rates are lower because not all of the eggs get incubated enough. And that is a major cost of nesting in a large group, is that groove-billed donnies is the same thing, that hatching rates go down in the larger clutches. Sometimes they will manage to pull off hatching a clutch of 11 or 12 eggs, but it's rare. The hatching rates are higher when it's just a single layer of eggs. Sorry, Barb's had her hand up for a long time.
So you mentioned the name of the white coating.
Oh,
on the
yes.
egg. So question was, what's the name? Do you know what the type of chemical composition and what's the purpose?
Good question. It's called vaterite, and it's a polymorph of calcium carbonate, which means that it's still CaCO3, which is the same stuff that they build the eggs out of, but the molecular structure is a little bit different. Don't ask me to explain what a polymorph is, but we can all Google it when we get home. Yes, indeed. If you look at, we actually did some scanning electron microscopy to like look at this coating, and it's basically like, it looks like foam packing peanuts. If you zoom in, it's like little spheres of this sort of soft, crunchy stuff that sit on the outside of the egg. And we tested two possible explanations for it. One is that it might change the way that gas diffuses across the eggshell during incubation. It might facilitate it, or it might suppress it. So we experimentally removed it from eggs, and we like put them in little desiccators and like measured how fast water evaporates through the shell, and we didn't find any difference. But then we also did, I worked with a physicist who did like these sort of stress tests, and it makes them less, we think it makes them less likely to crack. And so that might be useful when you're turning a bunch of eggs.
Shock absorber, really.
Exactly.
I mean, if you think about how you put stuff in like packing bubbles, you know. So-
That's exactly right. We think that's one of the advantages. However, it's kind of weird because across birds, very few species have vaterite, but some of the others that do are like anhingas and other birds that also nest in like sort of wet habitats. And so there has been a hypothesis out there that it has something to do with humidity, but we weren't able to find support for that. But it is certainly an odd thing. It's like popped up a few times in the avian family tree. Yeah.
Didn't, just about that, if I may, I thought you had indicated that the white, coating, serves a function in terms of signaling the age of the egg, the pure white, and then that slowly, presumably gets worn away, it falls off, more of the blue comes out, and so the anis can sort of age the eggs that way.
Good question. Yeah, we think that is true. They can do that, but I don't think that's why it originally evolved. One of the reasons I think that is that it's common across all of the crotophagine cuckoos. So the species in this genus all have it, as well as the Gira cuckoo, which is also in the same clade of cuckoos. And communal nesting was probably not ancestral in this clade. So they evolved, the common ancestor of cuckoos, as well as the common ancestor of this clade, were probably pair nesting cuckoos that didn't nest communally and had no need to recognize their own eggs or parasitic eggs or anything else. And it's a pretty small advantage compared to the cost of producing this like weird external layer on your egg. So my hypothesis is that it evolved for other reasons, like structural reasons, and that the signaling function is secondary. And once you have this thing on your egg that it happens to indicate age, you can use it. That's the kind of evolutionary hypothesis that is pretty hard to test and is mostly based on intuition, though.
Thank you.
So I had a question and a comment, except Greg stole my comment, but I have a further comment, which I think the electron microscopy and the comparison to packing peanuts might be relevant to the structural part. That could be a clue that it's providing some kind of structural resilience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, like I said, we did these stress tests that actually show that that is the case, that they are more, they have more resistance to pressure and cracking if they have the vaterite than if the vaterite is removed. So yeah, I think you're right.
Well, so my question had to do with non-breeding season. What do they do in the non-breeding season? Do they form larger groups?
They do. Yeah, they do. During the non-breeding season, they still associate with their group members, but they're not so tightly tied to the nest. They stay in the same area, so they will continue to be around their nesting territory, but they get together in these very large communal roosts during the non-breeding season that can have, in Panama, they can have like 60 or 100 birds in the communal roosts, but in other parts of the Amazon, it can be even more. And they roost in these groups, they forage socially as well, and their foraging groups are also more loose and more flexible than their breeding groups are. So you might see foraging groups in the non-breeding season that are like 15 birds, for example, and those might include breeding group members as well as their young from the previous year, as well as some floaters in the population, like young birds from other groups that are looking to join a group. So a lot of social reshuffling happens in the non-breeding season that we would like to know more about.
Let me do a question on Zoom, then I'll get back to you. Greg asks, do offspring from a given group always outcross to a different group for mating?
Yeah, great question. Almost always, but not 100% of the time. I don't think we've ever had a young female stay with her natal group to breed. They don't breed until they're 3 years old. So if they were to delay dispersal for 3 years and stay with their natal group, we have seen it a handful of times with males. So we have a couple of instances where male helpers remained as breeders in their group. They're not, Greg used the term outcross, which is not quite right, because even if they were to stay in their natal group, even if they were to breed with another member of their natal group, it could be with an unrelated individual, right? Like in theory, you could stay in your natal group, attract a different social mate, and raise young there. So we've
Right.
never had a pairing where like a bird paired with a relative or a natal group member. Yeah, good question.
How long do
Thank
they
you.
get? They can't constantly stay. They're gonna have to leave at some point.
They do. They leave when they're
Hard to hear that.
The question is, how long do they live? At some point, they have to leave the group. They can't stay in their group forever. So yeah, the vast majority do leave. Most of them leave after 1 year. Some of them, about 25%, leave after 2 years. They stay and act as a helper for a year. A very small percentage act as helpers for 2 years and then disperse. And an even tinier fraction never leave and they breed with their group. But most of them disperse between 1 and 3 years of age, and they can live up to 20 years, but most of them probably live about 6 to 10 years. But they're pretty long-lived. And that's assuming they kind of make it to adulthood. Like there's huge mortality in the first year after they fledge. So you can't really say that like the average lifespan is that long, but like the average lifespan for a breeding adult, like an adult that makes it to reproductive maturity, is several years.
So how long does the core communal group stay static across years? Like how many years?
The average, without any turnover, among the females at least, we don't know as much about the males. We know much more about the females. The average for a female to stay in a group is about 4 years, which means that for most females, they're changing groups between 1 and 3 times in their lifetime. Like I have seen females that have been a member of 4 different breeding groups across their lifetime, but it's much more common for them to stay with the same group for several years. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
Yeah, so groups provide protection against predators. How do honeys deal with snakes?
They mob them. Yeah, they mob them.
Actually get them to.
You know, it's not as effective as you'd hope, right? But they definitely do. They can drive snakes away from the nest, and they can deter a snake from taking more than like 1 nestling or 2 nestlings. I've certainly seen on video cameras, I've seen them drive away small snakes completely. And I've seen them kill snakes. So it is doing something. But the snakes, especially the bigger snakes, will come back to the nest repeatedly. So one of the main ways that Ani nests can be successful is if they have a large clutch with like 6 or 8 nestlings, like I said, the nestlings grow really fast. And at only 6 days of age, they can leave the nest. So if a predator finds the nest and returns to it repeatedly, it might take 1 nestling at a time or 2 nestlings at a time, like a snake, but some of those nestlings will still make it to day 6, at which point they can get away. So there's a lot of what's called partial predation in ani nests, where a predator kills some of the clutch, but not the whole clutch. And the rapid nestling development is common across cuckoos. But the hypothesis for it is that it evolved as an anti-predator defense, but the rapid nestling development also makes it easier for these other parental care strategies to evolve, like brood parasitism, like communal nesting, because you already have nestlings that are growing rapidly, nestlings that will outcompete host nestlings, for example. And rapid incubation as well. I didn't mention that. They have these enormous eggs and they only incubate them for 11 days. That's like the same as a northern parula. You know, they have really short incubation periods for the size of the egg. And they lay 1 egg every other day, not every day like most birds. So it takes them a long time to lay these large eggs, but then they have a short incubation period, a short nestling period.
You had the graph of A and B nesting. Do they alternate which one lays, or?
They do. Yeah, over time. Yeah, exactly. It's not like a tit for tat sort of thing, but like, yes, it's not repeatable. That they don't seem to have good control over who goes first, I think is the best way to put it. Yeah.
Sort of related to the snakes question, Linda asked, what is the common predator on the young? Assume that means like
The nestlings.
or
Yeah.
nestlings of fledgebirds, not sure.
Yeah, the nestlings, so snakes also eat the nestlings. They're a major predator of nestlings. Yellow-headed caracaras are a bird of prey in the study area that eat a lot of nestlings, and they occasionally eat eggs, but they mostly go for the nestlings. We've had common blackhawks attack nests and eat nestlings. It's if you're a developing ani, you spend a lot more time at risk as an egg than you do as a nestling, because the eggs, they lay 1 egg every other day, and then they have an 11-day incubation period. So there's like a minimum of like 2 weeks, between 2 and 3 weeks that an egg is in the nest, whereas there's only 6 days that the nestlings are in the nest before they can evade predators. So most of the predation that we document happens on eggs rather than nestlings, but that's probably simply an exposure thing.
I assume like fledgebirds will also have higher.
Yeah, the fledglings do too, and we don't really know what kills the fledglings. We know that a lot of them die,
Sure.
but we don't really know what kills them. After they fled, like the photo I showed you of the banded fledglings in the nest where they were about to leave, at that age, they are super cryptic. So they leave the nest, the parents bury them in vegetation, and they fly in and they feed them, but they're mobile, they can swim, they can climb, they're hard to keep track of. I'm sure everything would like to eat them though. They're like hawks and hawks and snakes and monkeys are probably the biggest predators.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to monopolize here.
I think it's too late for that.
Yeah.
Do they wait until the clutch is complete before they incubate? And if so, how do they know when it's complete?
Yeah, great question. So I think that the answer to those questions is linked, because they do mostly wait until the clutch is complete before they start incubating. And so hatching is mostly synchronous, but not completely. And I think that is because if you imagine a group with 3 females, when the female whose egg stayed in the nest first, so that is not female A, right? But whatever female was the last one to start laying, basically, she lays the first egg that stays in the nest. So she will also complete her clutch first, right? So if a female's like typical completed clutch is 3 or 4 eggs, so that once that female has laid her completed clutch, she or her social mate will start incubating. And it's really hard to tell who actually starts incubating, because they do a little bit of partial incubation throughout the laying period. It's not like no incubation and then all of a sudden they start 100%. It's more like they sit on the eggs every now and again, and then it becomes more and more and more and more frequent. And at some point, the eggs are warm and incubation has started. So the longer answer is that they are somewhat asynchronous, because other females may continue to lay after that first female's clutch is complete and after they've started incubation. So the later laid eggs often hatch later. And so the typical pattern is like the majority of the eggs hatch on the same day. And then the next day there are a couple of runts. And then maybe even the next day there are a couple of runts after that. And those runts at the end are where you really see a lot of effects of competition and starvation. The runts are much more likely to die than the ones that hatch on the same day. So hatching synchrony is really important for the anis. And they can fledge more nestlings if they're synchronous than if they're asynchronous. If they're asynchronous, you get, even if there are enough adults to feed the chicks, if they're asynchronous and you have runts at the end, the runts will die because they get outcompeted by the other nestlings.
Any other questions?
Just out of curiosity, do we know anything about nesting and breeding behavior in ground cuckoos?
The question is, do we know anything about nesting and breeding behavior in ground cuckoos? I think very little. I recently saw like a first nesting record for one of the Amazonian ground cuckoo species. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that they have pairs and provide parental care. But there is an independent origin of obligate brood parasitism on other species in the New World cuckoos. So the striped cuckoo is a New World cuckoo. It's not one of the ground cuckoos, but it's an obligate brood parasite. The pheasant cuckoo and the pavonine cuckoo, those are the three in this small lineage of New World cuckoos that are obligate brood parasites. And it's an independent origin from the Old World common cuckoo that I talked about. There are, I think, 3 separate origins of obligate brood parasitism within the cuckoo family. And that the New World cuckoos that I named are one of those origins. So yep, cuckoos are weird. They evolved all kinds of different bizarre things that are rare in birds.
Any other questions?
May I
ahead.
say something?
Go for it.
Yeah. May
Go
I
for
say
it.
something? Okay. Dr. Riehl, just want to really thank you. I'm the chair of the Ornithological Studies Committee, and when we convened a couple of years ago and got that committee going again, your name came up almost immediately from like everybody.
Oh, thanks.
So it's just really a pleasure to have you come speak. Just a fantastic, just so rich. I mean, you can tell, I mean, all the questions, people love this. And I tell you, though, I can't help but think of Jane Goodall, you know, observing chimps. There you are observing, you know, you and your colleagues are observing the anis, doing that kind of basic field research is just so important. And want to thank you for that. And we look forward to some of your students in the future coming. And, you know, in fact, you can send them so we can haze them with all our questions and toughen them up before they defend or something. You know, we can.
Absolutely, I will. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
the very kind words. Yeah, as well as for the invitation for the students. I have some students doing really cool stuff, so hopefully I will send them your way. Most of them are not studying anis, but they're studying other weird cooperative things in other parts of the world, other interesting birds. Yeah.
Please.
I was already
Well,
hitting.
Hopefully you can assign the most intrepid one to the ground cuckoos. Because
Right.
for people who
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know, these are famously impossible birds to see. You know, birders would kill to see these birds. And anyway, so it's a mythical group. I just want to say one other thing, though, that I think bears mention, and that is that for everyone listening, Dr. Riehl is the first woman to be the editor of the Auk, you know, the premier ornithological journal that started in 1884. And it only took them about 140 years, 140 years before a woman became the editor. So, you know, in the club here, we feel badly because it took us 80 years to admit women, but the darn AOU or AOS took 140 years. Anyway, just wanted to say that, and it's just awesome. So,
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you. Oh my God, yes. Well, yeah, that's really kind of you, but I'm just doing the same kind of work that, you know, we all go into bird watching and science to do. And the reason I started doing this work was because I was a bird watcher. So you guys are doing the important work in passing along that enthusiasm and that tradition to young people and getting them out in the field watching birds, because that's how science gets its start too. So yeah, but thank you, Greg. That's extremely kind of you.
Very welcome. Thank you.
We're going to the Cherry Street Tavern. You're invited.
I would love to come.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good night for Cuckoos.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you all
so
so
much.
much. Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much on Zoom.